See this cute little vial here? It's crack, rock cocaine, the most addictive form. You think it's the glamour drug of the 80s? Well, that's the point of this fronted little reminder. It can kill you. And if you've got to die for something, this sure as hell ain't it.
The drug epidemic is as dangerous as any terrorist that we face. It is serious. It is an epidemic, and it can kill.
The crack problem has become a crack crisis, and it's spreading nationwide.
And this is the most addicting thing that probably ever existed in the world.
A whole generation has been condemned to death.
In the 1980s, the United States faced an unprecedented crisis. First in Los Angeles, then across the rest of the country. A new drug spread like wildfire. Crack. A cheap version of cocaine, as accessible as it was destructive. In just a few years, it devastated poor neighborhoods, shattered entire families, and fueled violence, particularly within the Black community. A sudden epidemic that, at the time, was anything but accidental. You could even say it was orchestrated. Its origin took shape from far American streets, in a Central American country with a crucial stake, Nicaragua. At that time, tensions between the United States and the Soviet bloc were still at their peak. From the shadows of this global conflict, the CIA orchestrated a covert operation to support the Contras, a far-right paramilitary group opposed to Nicaragua's socialist regime. The goal? Stop the spread of communism, no matter the cost. And that cost? The CIA turned a blind eye to cocaine being imported to finance the Contras, weapons for Central America, and cocaine for the United States. A silent and lucrative traffic tolerated in the name of higher interests. And so, a clandestine market took shape, and an epidemic emerged, one where drugs flooded American streets and fueled gang violence. The result? Devastated neighborhoods, sacrificed generations, and a truth that remained in the shadows for far too long.
Cocaine and drugs are destroying this country, and it's going to get worse.
Why is it going to get worse?
Because we're out of control. We are out of control.
Back in the day, disappearing meant truly going dark. No phone, no signal, no paper trail. But these days, whether you're laying low or just flying out for a weekend, you still need data without leaving your digital fingerprints all over the place. That's where YouBiggie comes in, the sponsor of today's video. YouBiggie is an app that gives you prepaid eSIM data plans in over 200 destinations worldwide. No phone number, no SMS, just clean, instant mobile data wherever you land. And the best part? No roaming surprises. You save up to 90% compared to your regular carrier's fees, and it all works without any contract. Install the app, choose your destination, and activate your eSIM as soon as you arrive to get data. Perfect if you like to plan ahead and travel without stress. And unlike other apps, YouBiggie is the only one that lets you top up even when you're out of Wi-Fi or cell credit. That's right, stuck in a cafe with 0 bars, you could still get back online in seconds. You don't need to remove your physical SIM. Your YouBiggie eSIM works alongside your regular number, so you could still receive important calls or texts, and stick to WhatsApp to avoid extra fees. Way safer than public Wi-Fi, way cheaper than pocket hotspots, and way easier than hunting for a SIM at some random airport shop. Oh, and here's a quick tip. To check if your device supports eSIM, just dial *#06#. If you see an EID, you're good to go. Download the YouBiggie app today and use my promo code GANGSTER to get 10% off your first plan. Click the link in the description for details. It might just save you on your next trip. You never know when you'll need it. What you're about to hear is, unfortunately, drawn from a true story. This documentary is based on the work of Gary Webb, an investigative journalist who, at the cost of his own life, exposed the CIA's role in the importation of cocaine and the spread of crack in the United States. The facts presented in this video rely on his extensive investigations, particularly his book Dark Alliance. The narrative approach used here serves only one purpose: to make the message more impactful. But where am I?
He's awake, boss. Grayson! Grayson!
Who are you?
That's not important. What matters is the truth, Grayson. Nothing else. The truth about this operation. About what you did.
What are you talking about? Untie me, for fuck's sake!
You know very well what we're talking about. Remember, crack flooding the streets of LA, the neighborhoods left to rot, kids armed to the teeth, broken families, and all the deaths that came from that shit. All that for a war thousands of miles away. A war that didn't even concern your country.
No, I don't see it. Go fuck yourselves, I won't tell you anything.
We're not gonna beat around the bush. Norwin Meneses, the Nicaraguan Baron, Danilo Blandón, the liaison, and Freeway Ricky Ross, the crack king of South Central. All roads lead to you, Grayson.
You don't know anything. You have no idea what really happened.
We want the truth. The shipments, the money transfers, the weapon deliveries, the CIA, the Contras, all of it. Talk, Grayson. Tell us how it all started.
Fine! Spill it! That's what you want. The pure and simple truth is rarely pure and never simple. Oscar Wilde.
Let's start from the beginning. Tell us about Nicaragua, Grayson.
The beginning? You mean July 1979. A dictator in his bunker, surrounded on all sides. Anastasio Somoza. The last of a dynasty that had ruled for nearly half a century. His family had controlled Nicaragua with an iron fist since 1936.
Anastasio Somoza worked for you?
For us? Somoza did whatever we asked. He was our man. When the CIA needed backing in Central America, we went to him. In 1954, he helped us topple a pro-communist president in Guatemala. In 1961, he lent us a secret base for bombing Cuba during the Bay of Pigs invasion. 4 years later, he sent his men to crush a leftist uprising in the Dominican Republic. Hell, he even sent Nicaraguans to fight in Vietnam to keep Washington happy.
So why did you abandon him?
Because the wind had changed. The Sandinista revolutionaries, backed by Cuba and the USSR, were already at Managua's gates, the nation's capital. And in Washington, our image was starting to take a hit. La Guardia, Somoza's National Guard, was massacring civilians, torturing dissidents. It didn't look good. Too visible, too dirty. His murderous, corrupt apparatus was violating human rights. So we turned our back on Somoza, as if all that blood had never happened.
You Americans. And how did he take it?
Well, he felt betrayed. He begged the US ambassador to Nicaragua. He reminded him of everything he'd done for us, like a loyal soldier. But our decision had already been made. Somoza was no longer useful. He was gonna fall. So he tried one last move. He put La Guardia on the table. That private militia. We'd built it in the 1930s. Trained it in our bases. He told us, if I go down, La Guardia goes with me. And that scared us. We'd invested millions in that structure, arming it, training its officers in the complex arts of anti-communism. La Guardia was our bulwark against the red threat in Nicaragua. Our lever to keep influence, no matter who replaced him. The US ambassador promised he would do everything to preserve it. But in reality, it was already over. Somoza slipped away like a thief on the night of July 17, 1979. 2 private jets, his generals, his cronies, all bound for Florida. And La Guardia? It collapsed within hours. The Sandinistas entered Managua without firing a shot. They declared the end of the dictatorship, the end of La Guardia. Those who managed to flee crossed borders. The others ended up in prison or executed. Somoza's fall marked the end of a dictatorship, but it also marked the beginning of a covert war financed by cocaine. And while that old regime was being buried, in Washington they were already talking about something else. Not Nicaragua. Cocaine. Members of Congress were starting to panic. Cocaine from South America, Colombia, Bolivia, Peru was becoming almost fashionable. It was mentioned in the papers, celebrated in songs, shown in films, often in an oddly positive light. In Congress, a staunchly conservative representative, Tennyson Geyer, cried epidemic. He demanded measures, a war on drugs, but the rest of the country wasn't listening. For many, cocaine wasn't even considered a drug, just an elite indulgence, a chic powder supposedly to refine the look and sharpen the mind. At $2,500 for 30 grams, it was the drug of the privileged, the well-born. Congress? They didn't care. Even experts said coke wasn't dangerous, not addictive. But elsewhere, far from US borders, another version of cocaine was beginning to make headlines. In Peru, in Bolivia, a brown, sticky paste smoked in hand-rolled cigarettes. They called it pasta basica, the cocoa paste. It was the precursor to crack. For heavy users, it had everything to seduce. You could smoke as much as you wanted. No snorting, no waiting for the nose to absorb the powder. This was instant. The vapors hit the lungs directly. The effect was brutal. Not only faster, this paste was far purer, up to 80% cocaine content, compared with barely 20 to 30% for powdered coke. And most importantly, it cost next to nothing. A cheap, powerful, accessible drug. But the flip side was savage. The high lasted only minutes, and if you didn't follow up immediately with another dose, you sank into an abyssal depression. A hellish loop. Once you started, you couldn't stop. A Peruvian psychiatrist of the time warned, hallucinations, paranoia, lightning-fast addiction. Hundreds of men ruined, burned out, dehumanized by this new form of cocaine. But who listened? Reports were in Spanish. Nobody took them seriously. Still, a Los Angeles researcher sounded the alarm. Ronald Siegel. A respected toxicologist, he had studied cocaine's effects for years, in labs and in the field. Reading a Peruvian psychiatrist's reports on the cocoa paste, he realized something troubling. This new mode of consumption was no longer confined to South America. It was crossing borders and beginning to show up in Los Angeles. What Siegel discovered next was even more alarming. With their taste for innovation, Americans had found a way to go further. To turn powdered cocaine into a smokable form, even purer and more destructive. A simple chemical process freed the base by removing the element that made it water-soluble. They called it freebase, a smokable cocaine unlike anything anyone had tried before. And at that point, we were one step away from crack. In short, Ronald Siegel rang the alarm, as did other scientists. Data, testimonies, evidence, it was all there. This new drug drove people mad. Young people burned from the inside. Psychiatric clinics overflowing in Peru and Bolivia. And already disturbing signs in Los Angeles, San Francisco, Chicago, New York. Faced with these warning signs, a few voices rose to the top of the state. In Washington, one name stood out. Dr. Robert Bick, neuropharmacologist, Yale professor, known for editing Freud's work on cocaine. He was present the day the conservative representative Tennyson Geyer shouted about the cocaine pandemic. Seated calmly during long hearings, he waited his turn. When he spoke, Geyer introduced him respectfully, praising his very, very impressive credentials. And Robert Bick did not mince words. He denounced the misinformation spread by the government. He warned of what he saw as an imminent catastrophe.
We do not yet have an epidemic of freebase or smoking cocoa paste in the United States, but it is very likely that this could happen.
He therefore called for a nationwide information campaign.
We must show what happens when this drug is used, to prevent a potential epidemic.
But the room didn't want to hear that. No budget, no campaign, just a curt question.
What is the DEA doing to stop Bolivians and Peruvians from cultivating coca?
Yeah, these guys didn't grasp the gravity of what was coming. Because ultimately, that poison wouldn't stay on the slopes above Lima. It was going to come down the hills and into American streets. When truth is buried underground, it accumulates there with such explosive force that the day it erupts, it blasts everything away with it. Emile Zola.
Get back to Nicaraguan, Grayson. What happened after Somoza fled the country?
Yeah, Nicaragua. At that point, everything was collapsing. The Sandinista rebels were advancing. Somoza was finished. The Guardia was imploding. And while the local aristocracy was fleeing like rats, a man showed up in Los Angeles on July 5, 1979. His name? Oscar Danilo Blandón Reyes. A Nicaraguan exile, but not just anyone. Blandón was the son of a major landowner, married to an heiress from one of the most powerful families in Nicaragua. He had everything: wealth, connections, influence, and then in a matter of weeks, nothing. No more land, no more privileges. Forced to start from scratch in a country he knew nothing about. In Los Angeles, Blandón joined his family, who had arrived before him. But there was no way he was going to roll over and die. The Nicaraguan exile got moving again and found a job at a small used car lot run by two other compatriots, the Torres brothers, Nicaraguan giants who lived with two cousins of Pablo Escobar. Back then, the Torres brothers weren't yet in the cocaine trade, but it wouldn't take long. Same for Blandón, who at that moment started reaching out to old contacts, fellow Nicaraguans. At first, to talk about the country, exile, humiliation. Then the meetings became regular, more serious, and little by little, an idea took shape: organize a resistance from the United States.
We created a group in Los Angeles. There were 5 of us. We called it the FDN, the Nicaraguan Democratic Force.
Yeah, that was the early stage of what would become the Contras. But in truth, the FDN didn't exist yet. At that time, late 1979, early 1980, the money Blandón was collecting mainly went to support the Legion of September 15th, a group of Somoza veterans based in Guatemala, made up of the dictator's former bodyguards. It was only in August 1981 that the CIA merged several exile groups, including the Legion, to officially create the FDN, which would become the main Contra force.
And the CIA in all this? You're dancing around it, Grayson. Tell me how they got their hands in it.
Well, they waited until things were taking shape. When they saw that the Nicaraguan exiles were organizing, they sent an emissary, Enrique Bermudez, a former Guardia colonel, trained by the Americans and connected to the Pentagon. He was a trusted man, well regarded in Washington. On paper, it was clean. In 1980, the CIA contacted Bermudez and offered him a mission: build a resistance army against the Sandinistas. To do that, the agency put him in contact with the Legion of September 15th, the group of Somoza's old veterans. And a year later, under his leadership, the FDN was officially born. After that, Enrique Bermudez arrived in Los Angeles to recruit reinforcements, and among those he approached, one Danilo Blandón.
Is that when the large-scale cocaine trafficking begins?
Not yet. At that point, Blandón was still just a penniless political exile. But now, thanks to Bermudez and the CIA, he had a cause, helping his country's resistance. In Los Angeles, Bermudez visited the small circle of Nicaraguans Blandón belonged to.
Bermudez came to a group meeting to give a speech of encouragement and asked that the group uphold the idea of a free and democratic Nicaragua. He wanted us to make the Contras cause known in the United States.
Bermudez asked them to take back the FDN's colors, name, and flag, but also to formalize their commitment, and above all, to find money, vehicles, logistics. So Blandón followed through. He took out a loan to buy a new pickup truck, pretended it was for personal use, and sent it to Honduras, where the Contras had set up their headquarters. It'd be the first vehicle sent from the United States for the rebellion. But the cause needed more. Weapons, logistics, funding to keep a guerrilla alive. So another way had to be found. And that's when cocaine became more than a business. It became a weapon.
So cocaine became a weapon to finance the war in Nicaragua. And Norwin Meneses? We know almost nothing about him, and yet he seems even more involved than Blandón. Tell us about him, Grayson.
Norwin Meneses. He was already in the business long before all that, before the Contras, before the word cartel became famous. In the 1970s in Nicaragua, he was considered the king of cocaine. Meneses was the Cali cartel's representative in the country, brother of a Guardia General, close to the regime and protected by Somoza. He ran nightclubs, brothels, and was already trafficking kilos of powder. The cops? He bought them. The judges? He knew them all. And he'd know Enrique Bermudez for a long time, a link going back to childhood, notably through his brother Edmundo, an officer and close friend of the commander. So when the Sandinistas took power, Norwin fled, like the rest. But he didn't go into hiding. No, he restarted drug trafficking, here, in the United States. San Francisco, Miami, LA. And it was in Miami that Meneses' fate crossed with Blandón's. One day, Danilo Blandón got a call. A former classmate, a well-connected exile, told him someone was about to arrive in Los Angeles, and he'd better listen to him. That someone was Norwin Meneses. Blandón waited for him at the airport. He'd heard the rumors, the stories. He knew this was a dangerous man. When they met face to face, Meneses got straight to the point. He laid out the plan. They needed to find money, fast, to send to Honduras. According to Blandón, that meeting had a very clear purpose: launch the movement, the Contras revolution. And for that, Meneses proposed a direct method: sell cocaine in Los Angeles to fund the war. Blandón would later confirm it, saying,
Norwin Meneses told me to traffic drugs in Los Angeles to raise money for the Contras. And that's how we started.
At first, Blandón hesitated. Selling cocaine to help his country's resistance wasn't what he'd imagined. But the idea took root, and if cocaine was the price to fund the revolution, so be it.
You're holding back, Grayson. How the hell did a guy like Norwin Meneses get into the United States? A cocaine baron of his caliber, with a rap sheet a mile long, already flagged by the FBI and the DEA since the 70s? What's the story? Did he have a pass? A CIA stamp?
If you just let me finish! Even the Justice Department never figured it out. In 1997, an inspector general tried to understand how this guy could come and go so often. The result? Gaping holes in the records. Nothing clear. And yet, he'd been on the radar for years. Theft, trafficking, even a murder in Managua. Seems Meneses had his connections. He himself admitted to having helped CIA agents cross the Nicaraguan border after the Sandinista revolution. Meneses knew how to move around there, where to cross. So yeah, maybe he got a favor in return. Anyway, Blandón and Meneses then went together to Honduras, to an FDN camp, to meet Enrique Bermudez. Bermudez gave them another encouragement speech, talking about the organization's struggles to raise funds and secure equipment to support the Contras. He assigned them a specific mission: raise money from California.
There's a saying that the end justifies the means. And that's what Bermudez told us in Honduras.
Meneses later confirmed it. He didn't even try to deny anything. He admitted to having raised funds for the FDN in the San Francisco area, and to recruiting soldiers among Nicaraguan exiles living in the United States. And by then, the Contras weren't a group anymore. They were a business, a contracted war machine. Or rather, an unofficial branch of the CIA. The problem was, the money wasn't following. Between 1979 and 1981, Somoza's former supporters were desperately trying to organize. But without resources, their efforts were pointless. Everything was stuck. Official funds? Bogged down in bureaucracy. Filtered. Pathetic. In Washington, President Jimmy Carter had cut ties. Nothing was moving. But in the fall of 1980, everything changed. Ronald Reagan entered the picture. And with him, a new perspective. He didn't see a new regime in Nicaragua. He saw a red thread at America's doorstep, a second Cuba, ready to infect Central America. So just days after his inauguration, Reagan froze all aid to the Sandinista government, and he authorized the CIA to find solutions. Fast. From then on, agents were sent to the field. They identified anti-Sandinista groups and distributed just enough money to keep the flame alive. Then, in November 1981, the Contras project had gained enough momentum for the CIA to officially back the FDN, the main armed force of the Contras, and a few weeks later, Ronald Reagan signed a secret plan to weaken the Sandinista regime, authorizing the CIA to launch covert political and military operations against Nicaragua. The initial budget? $19.95 million. A ridiculous sum, considering it was meant to arm and coordinate a paramilitary group. Officially, operations were supposed to be carried out by Latin American exiles. But for sensitive missions, the CIA sent its own Latino agents, trained to muddy the waters. That way, in case of arrest, the agency could deny everything. William Casey, CIA director, appeared before Congress in December 1981 to justify the strategy. He argued it was necessary for national security. And from that moment on, the war in Nicaragua became a fully American project. The CIA had taken the wheel. It oversaw arms transfers, planned operations, recruited trainers, distributed money, and ran strategy like a real command center. As for the Contras, their role was simple: carry out orders, obey without asking questions, and above all, deny any connection to the CIA. The great enemy of the truth is very often not the lie, deliberate, contrived, and dishonest, but the myth, persistent, persuasive, and unrealistic. John F. Kennedy.
And in the meantime, Norwin Meneses was flooding the country with cocaine. What was it, Grayson? Small quantities or full shipments?
We were talking shipments, yeah. According to Blandón, Meneses' organization brought 900 kilos of cocaine into the United States in 1981, nearly a ton. Estimated value at the time? $54 million. And still, according to Blandón, all that money was meant to finance the war against the Sandinistas.
What about Danilo Blandón? We want to know more about his rise.
Blandón's beginnings in the coke trade were slow. Too slow. 2 kilos in his hands, and nobody to move him. Blandón didn't know anything about the cocaine business. Meneses was putting pressure on him every week. So he did what he knew. He turned to his old contacts in the auto world. Friends, acquaintances in garages and dealerships. That's where he found his first customers. Little by little, it caught on. The powder moved. The money came in. Most of what he earned went straight to Meneses, who was then responsible for passing it on to the Contras. But Blandón wasn't getting rich. Meneses was the one centralizing the money for the cause. Blandón only got crumbs. Understand this, Blandón barely had enough to pay his rent and feed his daughter. Nothing more. Yet despite those rough beginnings, something eventually happened. By the end of 1982, his cocaine business exploded.
And what caused that sudden expansion, Grayson?
There were 2 reasons. The first was that the cocaine epidemic already ravaging South America had finally reached Los Angeles, just as doctors had warned for years. And the second was a kid from the Los Angeles ghetto. A resourceful, street-smart teenager willing to do anything. His name? Ricky Donald Ross. But on the street, everyone would soon call him Freeway Ricky Ross, the future king of crack, the one who, along with Danilo Blandón, would change Los Angeles forever. Ricky Ross, born in South Central, poor neighborhood in Los Angeles, saw his first rock at age 19. It was around Christmas 1979. One of his buddies showed up with something new. A small, white, grainy pebble. He had to put it in a pipe and smoke it. Ricky first thought it was a joke. He'd grown up in the ghetto. He knew drugs. He'd seen them. But this didn't look like any of them. And with good reason. At the time, cocaine was the kind you snorted in LA's rich neighborhoods. Definitely wasn't some strange little rock you lit with a lighter on a street corner. Ricky then showed the drug to an old pimp, who tested it, and immediately wanted more. Except Ross had nothing to give him. He had no supply, no network. He didn't even know where to find any. In his neighborhood, coke was nearly non-existent. In South Central, the everyday drug was weed, not cocaine powder. Tiny quantity of coke alone cost nearly half the average annual income of a local resident. That tells you everything. And yet, that Christmas of 1979, Ricky Ross laid eyes on the raw, handmade, accessible version of a drug that, a few years later, would take on a very specific name. A direct offshoot of Freebase, simplified for the street, stripped of its flammable solvents, and infinitely more dangerous in its consequences. It wasn't crack yet, but it was the precursor, a glimpse of the storm that was about to devastate America.
So how did Ricky Ross get into the dope trade?
Ricky Ross wasn't destined to become a drug kingpin. Back then, he didn't drink, didn't smoke. He'd never been in serious trouble with the law. He wasn't even affiliated with a gang, even though he'd grown up around the 74 Hoover Crips. They were old friends, familiar faces from the neighborhood. But him? He didn't have time for that. After class, he went straight to practice. Yeah, because his passion was tennis. His way out. He already pictured himself getting a scholarship at a big university, maybe even going pro. He had talent, enough to make his high school's best team 3 years in a row. But there was one problem. Ricky couldn't read or write. So college? Impossible. Without that, he dropped out of school and quit tennis. The dream collapsed. At home in South Central, it was his mother, Annie, who kept watch. A strict woman, a janitor in downtown office buildings. She searched his room, checked his stuff, hunted for the slightest sign of trouble. Yeah, because Ricky's father had been gone a long time. He left when Ricky was still a kid. So Annie was the one holding the house together, alone. In South Central, Ricky saw his future closing in. No more university, no more tennis. He had to find something else. That's how, in 1979, Ricky found a new foothold thanks to a guy he'd met on the tennis court. Mr. Fisher. An auto upholstery teacher. Fisher managed to get him a spot in a vocational training center. Ricky started taking auto repair classes while continuing to spend time with Fisher, who gradually became a father figure. And little by little, Ricky discovered another side of him. Mr. Fisher was involved in cocaine trafficking. After enough conversations, Fisher eventually showed him a small amount of cocaine, $50 worth, easy to resell. For a kid from South Central looking for money, the idea started to make sense. He then talked it over with Ollie Newell, a friend recently out of prison, pushed him to give it a try. Ricky hesitated, but eventually agreed. He felt ready to try. With the first sample supplied by Fisher, the two of them started dealing dope. But it got burned at first. The first customer ran off without paying. So Ricky and Ollie stole a car to finance another purchase of cocaine. This time, their customer didn't disappear, and their investment paid off. They resold in small doses, made several $100s, and fell right back into the cycle. Buy, cut, sell. From that moment on, Ricky Ross had set foot in a business that would soon become massive. It has to be said, it was the perfect time to start dealing cocaine. By 1982, America was seeing unprecedented quantities of coke flooding in. In Miami, seizures were skyrocketing, especially because of the Medellin cartel, which was flooding the market there. Result, the price per kilo dropped. From $75,000, it fell to $60,000 in no time. For Ricky and Ollie, it was the moment to take advantage. With the price now lower, their network logically expanded. In the drug trade, Ricky Ross applied the same discipline he had in tennis. No partying, no personal use. He didn't want to end up ruined like so many dealers addicted to their own product. His friend Ollie sometimes gave in, but Ricky would pull him back in line and tell him to reinvest all profits into the merchandise. At that time, Ricky didn't see himself as a criminal, but as a professional. He almost believed it was his calling.
Some people think God put them here to be preachers. I felt like he put me here to be a cocaine dealer.
But Mr. Fisher, their initial supplier, wasn't prepared for that pace. He didn't want to be involved at that level of trafficking anymore. So he directed Rick and Ollie to Ivan Arguelles, another Nicaraguan exile who had already been supplying Fisher for a year. Ross met him, and Ivan offered to deal with them directly, without going through Fisher, so he could give them better prices. By working with Ivan, Ricky and Ollie were able to buy cocaine in larger quantities. And since Fisher had been taking a big cut on every deal, dealing directly with Ivan allowed them to increase their profits. For about 8 months, the supply through Ivan continued. Then suddenly, Ivan disappeared without warning. No more product, no more contact. Ross and Newell were screwed. At least until the day a certain Danilo Blandón decided to step in.
So Blandón just showed up like that, at the perfect time?
He didn't show up by chance. Blandón had been watching for a while. Ever since Ivan vanished, Ricky had become the kind of client you don't let slip. A black kid from South Central doing better than all the Latinos in LA? It was an anomaly. But above all, an opportunity. So Blandón didn't need long to think. He was working for Norwin Meneses, moving 1 or 2 kilos at a time, without ever taking off. Meneses was pressuring him to bring in more money for the Contras, but he sold at high prices and kept almost all the profits. And that didn't exactly help Blandón. He didn't even own a car. He had to rent them just to make his trips. Basically, Blandón was living under pressure, with no room to maneuver. Meanwhile, Ivan had discovered Ricky Ross. And with him, the business was growing. Blandón was watching all of this, but he was stuck on his side, tied to Meneses. He watched the kid from South Central grow without being able to reach him.
I wish I'd known Ricky, because I wanted to grow in the business.
And then the opportunity came for Blandón. Ivan was seriously injured by his wife, a bullet to the spine, paralyzed from the waist down, hospitalized for months, and forced to quit trafficking. Yeah, that's why Ivan had disappeared. So Henry Corrales, Ivan's brother-in-law, took over. But Henry had neither the experience nor the contacts. The guy just wanted to party and wasn't built for the business. For Blandón, this was the moment, chance to finally take control. He went to offer his help to Henry, who immediately accepted. He didn't really have another choice. The two then agreed on an arrangement. Blandón would supply pure cocaine from Colombia, and Henry would keep selling to Ricky Ross. They'd split the profit, 50-50. Ricky didn't see what was happening behind the scenes. He just noticed that his prices were dropping again. That's when Blandón and Ricky truly became connected. A discreet link, but one that would change both their destinies. For Ricky, it was the beginning of his empire. And for Blandón, an entire entry point into a trade that would soon flood the city. I'm for truth, no matter who tells it. I'm for justice, no matter who it's for or against. I'm a human being, first and foremost. And as such, I'm for whoever and whatever benefits humanity as a whole. Malcolm X.
And Ricky Ross? When did he start dealing crack?
Well, at first he was selling powdered cocaine. But shortly after his partnership with Blandón, something started to change in South Central. He noticed that some of his customers were transforming the cocaine themselves. They were making those strange little rocks, like the one he'd seen a few years earlier, that Christmas of '79. Back then, it was still rare, but this time, it was coming back. The rock Ricky saw reappear in his neighborhood wasn't exactly freebase anymore. No, it was a simplified version, stripped of chemical solvents, made for the street. A cheap product, easy to make. Yeah, that was crack. Not yet called that, but the final form was already there. Strangely, at first, nobody wanted it. The product looked suspicious. A cocaine you could buy for $25? To many, it seemed like a scam. But then Ricky remembered the pimp who had smoked the rock and came back jittery, ready to buy more. He understood one thing. If this stuff caught on, it could be huge. Ricky noticed that some users of this new drug didn't have the time or desire to prepare their dose. They were asking Ricky to give them the rock ready to smoke. So he agreed. In the beginning, Ricky Ross didn't know how to cook it. He paid others to make the rocks for him. But the cooks made things complicated and kept their recipes secret. In reality, it was simple. All you had to do was heat cocaine powder with water and baking soda. As soon as it crackled, it was ready. Ross eventually watched his cooks and decided to try it himself. He crumbled the rocks and sold them in $20 packs. Ross even smoked some himself, but the product was so strong, he swore he would never touch it again. He'd seen the effect it had on his customers. After one hit, they didn't want anything else. In short, crack was here. And that's how it began to spread through all of South Central. But for Ricky, crack wasn't immediately the goldmine he'd hoped for. By the end of 1982, he started to see the limits of the market. With powder, he could sell at a higher price, inflate his margins, and nobody complained. With rocks, it was a different story. When crack hit the street, Ricky had to sell doses at $20, chasing cars, collecting each bill one by one. It was tedious at first. Fortunately for him, crack had opened the cocaine market to everyone. You no longer had to be rich to use it. A few dollars were enough to get hooked. Pre-packaged doses within everyone's reach. Simple, fast, accessible. That's what made crack successful. But this new market came with a price. Crack also democratized resale. Anyone could buy half a gram of powder for $150, turn it into 10 or 12 rocks, and double their money. Customers became competitors, which meant Ross not only had to deal with other dealers, but also his own buyers. From then on, Ricky understood that to stay on top, he had to change scale, get off the street, sell wholesale. For Ross, it was clear. Instead of selling retail, he was going to become a wholesaler and supply the dealers, sell them ready-made crack in batches at cut prices, ready to move. It was toward the end of 1982 that Ricky Ross made that decision, and it changed everything. He reduced his costs, eliminated direct competition, took back control of the market. In other words, he'd become the first crack wholesaler in Los Angeles. But just as Ross was finding his rhythm, a new problem appeared. Henry Corrales, his supplier, was starting to scare him. He didn't show up on time anymore. He refused to come down into the neighborhood. And when he did, he was nervous, on edge. Ross didn't like that. Henry was his only link to the product, since at that point he still didn't know Blandón, the man actually supplying Henry. So Ricky was right to be worried. Henry didn't have the guts to keep going. According to Blandón, at the time he was delivering him between 10 and 15 kilos a week, almost 50 kilos a month. That represented nearly 1 million doses of crack moved through South Central every month. Blandón and Meneses were bringing in entire planes from Miami. 4 planes loaded with cocaine. Each one carried between 200 and 400 kilos. The volume was becoming massive, and it was too much for Henry, who was becoming paranoid. He was afraid he'd end up in prison, or worse. So he wanted out, flee to Honduras. But before leaving the country, he offered Blandón the chance to take over the business with Ross directly, on one condition: keep paying him a commission on every sale. Obviously, Blandón agreed. The kid from South Central would turn out to be a gold mine for him. So one day, Henry took Ross to meet Blandón for the introductions. He picked him up and suggested they go for a drive.
I'm leaving. I'm going to put you with this guy. He'll cut you better deals. You'll get better prices. Everything will go better for you.
And he was right. As soon as Ricky Ross started dealing directly with Blandón, the price of cocaine dropped again. He had the best price in the city, and that's when Ricky leveled up. He wasn't moving grams anymore. He was selling kilos. Over 200 kilos of cocaine each month, which represented about 165,000 vials of crack a day. 5 million rocks moved per month. It was a full-blown industry. Starting in 1984, it blew up. Blandón was pouring a mountain of cocaine every week into the black neighborhoods of Los Angeles. For him and for Ross, 1984 was a terrifying year. Everything was going too fast. In 1984 and 1985, Ross and Blandón admitted that their empire had reached its peak. Ross was selling coke so fast he didn't even have time to turn it into crack. He just received the kilos and redistributed them. Behind him, small crack producers, often tied to different Crips gangs in Los Angeles, handled the cooking. And demand kept growing.
It just kept rising, until he was buying 100 kilos a week from me.
Ross called him non-stop, 2-3 times a day, at any hour. Sometimes at 2 in the morning, sometimes at 4. Blandón was going crazy. So to keep up, he made a deal with his Colombian suppliers. He asked them to trust Ross, to front him the cocaine.
Hey, let's give this guy some credit. He's a good payer.
And they agreed. Ross got an advance of 20 to 25 kilos of cocaine without spending $1. That advance represented nearly $1 million at wholesale price. That moment, everything seemed to be going their way. But Ross then noticed a change. Danilo Blandón, his supplier, was starting to let himself go a little too much. He was drinking, snorting, and even tried to get Ross to take cocaine with him. Ross refused every time. With his excesses, Blandón had softened. He put on weight. And Ricky was getting nervous. It made sense. He'd spent 2 years perfecting his system. Everything worked like a well-oiled machine, and he was afraid his empire would collapse overnight. Looking at the situation, he saw a weakness he could no longer ignore: his total dependence on Danilo Blandón. The problem was, no other supplier could compete with Blandón. With him, Ross got cocaine at an unbeatable price. While others paid $45,000 a kilo, he was getting it for $38,000. And with him, there was never a shortage. Besides, Blandón wasn't just his supplier, he was also his protector.
In Los Angeles, Danilo always told me they were going to raid my place. The cops straight up thought one of their own was working for me.
And every time, it proved true. A few days later, the cops showed up. So Ross knew exactly what he owed Blandón. So switching suppliers? That would have been like shooting himself in the foot.
So Ricky Ross stayed loyal to Blandón until the end?
Not exactly. Ricky owed him everything, but he had understood a simple rule. In this business, loyalty had its limits. After seeing Blandón stuck on his couch, unable to deliver on time over and over again, Ross decided to look for other sources. Among the offers he received, there was one from the Torres brothers, the two Nicaraguan giants who were also involved in the cocaine trade. Ross had met them through Blandón. One day, the Torres brothers had discreetly slipped him their number, just in case. Ross remembered it and called them one day. The Torres brothers were ready to do business with him. Their prices were roughly the same as Blandon's, and that's how Ricky started playing both sides. He bought from Blandón, then from the Torres brothers. Then he went back to Blandón, claiming his other suppliers were giving him better deals, and he did the same in the other direction. A real balancing act, with him as the only winner. Blandón never knew exactly how much cocaine the Torres brothers were selling to Ross, but he did know their volume had exploded. When he was delivering 100 kilos to Ross in a week, the Torres brothers could be moving 50, sometimes even 100. Ross knew it. He had to cover himself, just in case. And to go even further, he followed Blandon's advice and started investing. Ricky invested methodically. He bought houses, buildings, an auto parts store, and above all, a motel. A small establishment located near a freeway, the Freeway Motor Inn, a discreet transit spot, perfect for meetings between dealers and couriers. And that's where his nickname came from, Freeway Rick. All around him, crack was beginning to rot the city. Crack, which at first was just a neighborhood rumor, started to spread. And wherever it went, it brought chaos and violence. In the early 1980s, the Crips and the Bloods were still, for the most part, local neighborhood gangs. They controlled a few blocks, a few streets. But when crack arrived, it changed everything. According to a 1989 report, just a few years, the crack market had transformed these gangs into extremely violent criminal organizations. The money they were making was unprecedented. And to keep this new empire, they obviously needed more territory, more weapons, more men. The lure of profit pushed Los Angeles gangs to expand, not just from one neighborhood to another, but across the country. Oregon, Kansas, Oklahoma, North Carolina, Virginia, Maryland, wherever they went, they took crack with them. And with it, violence. Washington, D.C. alone was distributing 200 kilos of cocaine per week in 1989. And a large share of that came from LA's Crips and Bloods. And at the heart of that empire was, of course, Freeway Rick. No matter the gang, no matter the color, one customer was as good as another for Ricky, as long as he paid. And so began an unprecedented migration. With the Crips and the Bloods spreading crack, territory wars and automatic weapons followed throughout America. Before, South Central was poor, the families held on. After crack, it had become a war zone. Weapons had flooded the streets. A member of the East Side Crips himself would say,
Before, nobody had 9mm, M16s, or AK-47s. After 1986, anyone could get one.
But where do those weapons come from, Grayson?
Danilo Blandón was behind it all. As early as 1984, he had begun selling military-grade weapons to Ricky and his circle. He supplied them with everything they wanted. Pistols, assault rifles, submachine guns.
So you were fighting communism by arming the gangs of Los Angeles?
Blandón, at least, had never hidden the truth. The weapons flooding South Central did come from his network. And his network was the Contras network. Officially, it was for private security. In reality, the weapons followed two routes. Some went straight into the streets of LA. Others were sent to friends in the South. But the guns ending up in South Central? were only the tip of the iceberg. Beneath that, a much larger network was being woven in the shadows. From the early 1980s, reliable informants were sounding the alarm. The Justice Department was receiving increasingly disturbing reports. The Contras, the Colombian cartels, and even elements of the US government seemed to be tied by the same trafficking. Weapons in exchange for cocaine. A childhood friend of Norwin, Meneses, recruited by the DEA, had told everything. According to him, Meneses was shipping cocaine from Colombia, sometimes via Nicaragua. Part of the money collected was then used to buy weapons for the Contras. Deliveries, he said, were facilitated by American agents themselves. Sometime later, another trafficker turned informant, Alan Raul Rudd, gave an even more explosive account. Rudd had met Pablo Escobar in Medellin, one of the cartel's leaders there. And during a conversation, Escobar complained about the anti-drug task force launched by then Vice President George Bush in South Florida. Since that program had been put in place, delivering cocaine to Miami had become much riskier for the Colombians. That's when Escobar dropped a bomb. According to him, there had once been an agreement between the Medellin cartel and the US government. Escobar claimed that planes similar to US C-130s delivered weapons to Colombia. The cartel unloaded them, then reloaded the planes with cocaine. Weapons offloaded by the cartel for reloading the aircraft with cocaine shipments bound for US military bases. He didn't mention the CIA, but according to Rudd, that was clearly the implication. And to top it off, Escobar claimed to have proof. Photos of the weapons unloaded in Colombia. And above all, one explosive photograph. A picture of George Bush himself posing next to another Medellin cartel boss, Jorge Ochoa, in front of suitcases full of cash. A serious blackmail asset for Escobar and the cartel. But officially, and fortunately for the US government, the photo was never resurfaced. Rudd, however, wasn't the only one telling that story. Around the same time, an FBI informant in Miami, Wanda Palacios, made a similar revelation. The wife of a Colombian trafficker, she claimed to have witnessed in 1983 and 1985 the landing of planes used by the CIA in Barranquilla, Colombia. On board, shipments of weapons exchanged for cocaine. Palacios said she'd accompanied Pablo Escobar in a limousine to the landing site, and that Jorge Ochoa himself had boasted of working with the CIA to move the merchandise into South Florida. Once again, planes, weapons, cocaine, the CIA. Everything seemed to point in the same direction. Finally, there's the story of Barry Seal, a former airline pilot who became one of the biggest drug traffickers in the southern United States in the 1980s. Recruited by the Medellin cartel, he was importing entire shipments of cocaine into Florida and Louisiana. But what few people knew at the time was that Barry Seal was also secretly working for the DEA. He allegedly took part in covert operations linked to the Contras, delivering weapons to Nicaragua and returning to the United States with cocaine on board. In 1984, the White House recruited him to set up the Sandinista regime. Seal infiltrated an operation in Nicaragua and came back with the proof Washington was waiting for. Photos showing Pablo Escobar and his men loading a plane with cocaine at a Nicaraguan airport, apparently under Sandinista protection. The timing was perfect. On the eve of a crucial vote in Congress on aid to the Contras, Ronald Reagan decided to broadcast one of the images on national television.
This picture, secretly taken at a military airfield outside Managua, shows Federico Vaughn, a top aide to one of the 9 commandantes who rule Nicaragua, loading an aircraft with illegal narcotics bound for the United States. No, there seems to be no crime to which the Sandinistas will not stoop. This is an outlaw regime.
The message was clear. The Sandinistas are narco-traffickers. And faced with that, supporting the Contras becomes a duty. But the truth is far murkier. Declassified documents later revealed that even the CIA was never able to prove the Sandinista regime's direct involvement in the trafficking. Despite months of investigation, not a single solid piece of evidence. The whole show was staged. A manipulation designed to sway public opinion. And Barry Seal? He was assassinated in 1986 in New Orleans by Colombian hitmen. Officially, on orders from the cartel. Off the record, maybe because he knew too much. And while the Contras were being supplied in the south, the storm was tearing through the north. Neighborhood by neighborhood, street by street, America was sinking, but no one was watching. Until the day someone finally looked up. A cop named Jerry Gutzetta, Narcotics Division, Los Angeles County. A guy who hated dealers more than most. One of them had killed his brother. So for him, it wasn't about justice anymore. It was personal. One day, Jerry Gutzetta started investigating a ridiculous detail, an unemployed guy who had bought 8 money-counting machines. Just a yellow light in the daily grind of a cop like Gutzetta. But for him, it was enough. He dug until he found 2 outsized figures. The Torres brothers. 2 giants with no visible criminal record, but bank accounts overflowing with cash. They were always in South Central, dropping off suitcases and picking up others. Gutzetta started watching them. Until the day he discovered that one of the Torres brothers was on probation for cocaine possession, enough to get a warrant. Result? On August 11th, 1986, Gutzetta and his colleagues raided the Torres' place. There, they hit the jackpot. $400,000 in cash hidden in a closet. But no trace of drugs. The Torres brothers were too smart. Like Blandón, they always kept the money separate from the product. If they were convicted, they risked, 3 years max? For Gutzetta, that wasn't enough. He needed better. So he had an idea. What if he tried to turn the Torres brothers into allies? The Torres brothers had a weak spot. Their girlfriends, who happened to be close relatives of the drug lord Pablo Escobar. So Gutzetta gave them an ultimatum. Either they cooperated, or their partners would be prosecuted, jailed, then deported. For the Torres brothers, that was unthinkable. In their culture, sacrificing family was worse than prison. And betraying a man like Escobar, that wasn't even an option. It was a guaranteed death sentence. Cornered, the Torres brothers finally gave in. And then, everything became clear. Through their confessions, a sprawling network appeared. Routes, safe houses, tons of coke, entire truckloads of cash. The Torres brothers estimated they had laundered nearly $100 million since January 1986. They claimed to have hidden between $250 and $500 million around Los Angeles, and to have over 1,000 kilos of cocaine in reserve. Gutzetta couldn't believe his eyes. He thought he was dealing with 2 bullshit artists. But when the Torres brothers took him to see the operation, Gutzetta saw the deliveries. Suitcases full of cash, 40 kilos of cocaine dropped off, $720,000 picked up in a few days. It was unbelievable. Every location had a purpose. An empty building was actually a conversion lab. Another, busier one, a distribution hub. And that brand new motel, the Freeway Motor Inn, Ricky Ross's base. And besides turning in Ross, the Torres brothers also turned in Danilo Blandón. They revealed to Gutzetta how, for months, Blandón had supplied Ricky and Ollie. How, thanks to him, cocaine deliveries never stopped. Investigators then understood that behind South Central, there was a channel, a real pipeline, stretching all the way back to South America. Protected, discreet route that no one had managed to identify until then. They also learned that Danilo Blandón wasn't just a supplier, but a man with murky connections. A man with access to confidential information, described by the Torres brothers as untouchable, protected by backers they themselves were afraid to name. On paper, it looked like a decisive victory. Except in reality, it was a dead end. Gutzetta and his colleagues actually had no way to establish direct proof that these individuals were involved in drug trafficking, or that all the merchandise belonged to them. So in the meantime, Blandón and Ricky kept flooding Los Angeles with crack. Every week, millions of dollars worth of cocaine was moving through the city, and strangely, even under the FBI's watch, Blandón continued his business without a hitch. Investigators then realized that, to strike hard, they had to target the man at the center of the crack market in South Central. That's how, on January 12, 1987, the Sheriff's Department and the LAPD joined forces to create a special unit, the Freeway Rick Task Force. It was unheard of. An entire multi-jurisdictional brigade set up to take down a single man. At that point, Freeway Rick had clearly become law enforcement's top priority. The police were done listening to rumors and chasing shadows. They were going to wage war. He had to be taken down, not just for drugs, but as an example. An official report from the task force put it bluntly. Taking down Ricky Ross would send a powerful message to all of South Central, a clear warning. No one was untouchable. For some, like Utseta, it had become personal. Same with Steve Pollock, a veteran of the streets of South Central, who had watched crack turn neighborhoods into war zones. To him, Freeway Rick wasn't just a dealer. He was responsible for all that chaos, ground zero of a national epidemic.
What he did was poison tens of thousands of people. Not just in LA. The cancer he unleashed spread across the entire United States.
With police on his heels, Ricky Ross quickly felt the pressure. The Freeway Rick Task Force didn't let up. On January 21st, 1987, they hit hard. The Freeway Motor Inn was stormed like an enemy stronghold. Every room searched, cash seized, and an ultra-sophisticated radio device found, tapped into police frequencies. That same day, the task force raided Rick's mother's house. They found an Uzi and 2 bulletproof vests. When Ross called, furious to protest the search, Pollock didn't flinch. He wanted to bring down the crack king, destroy everything he'd built. In short, the raids kept coming and the blows multiplied. Things were looking bad for Ricky. By the end of January, the Freeway Rick Task Force was showcasing its trophies. 15 warrants executed, 5 arrests, nearly 4 kilos of crack seized, $63,000 in cash, 20 firearms. And above all, a detailed map of Freeway Rick's empire. The head of the task force would later admit, it wasn't a network, it was a goddamn cartel. Meanwhile, Danilo Blandón could feel the storm closing in. The repeated raids on his properties, pressure on Freeway Rick, everything pointed to time running out. So Blandón made a decision. He quietly left Los Angeles. He liquidated his businesses, sold his properties, and sent his wife and children to Florida, where he later joined them. He took $1.6 million in cash with him, fully intent on starting a new life.
So that was it? The beginning of the end?
No, not quite. At that point, Ricky Ross was still standing. But he could feel something had changed. His mentor, Danilo Blandón, had disappeared. The legal storm kept growing. And for the first time, he started to doubt. He began looking around him and seeing what his empire had created. And in the streets of Los Angeles, the atmosphere had changed too. The market was saturated. Competition was eating everything alive. The Crips, the Bloods, independent dealers, everyone was trying to grab whatever they could. Ricky watched prices collapse. A kilo of coke that used to be worth $50,000 was now selling for $12,000. The street had become a battlefield. That's when he told himself he needed to plan his exit.
There is a recklessness in today's gang wars that make even the prohibition battles of the 1920s pale by comparison.
In the fall of 1988, Ricky Ross left Los Angeles and moved to Cincinnati. For him, it was a fresh start, far from the chaos of South Central. There, he hoped to turn the page, buy houses, build a new life, become someone else. But deep down, Freeway Rick was still Freeway Rick, and the drug world was still calling him. It was stronger than him. So when Danilo Blandón called him from Miami, the temptation was too strong for Rick. The Nicaraguan trafficker was offering him a new deal, an opportunity he couldn't pass up. And Ricky fell back in. Everything seemed to start up again. Business was resuming. But what Rick didn't know was that at the same time, Blandón was playing a double game. He was no longer the partner he once was. He was planning his exit, his survival. Yeah, because starting in May 1992, Blandón became an informant for the DEA. He'd been arrested for trafficking and money laundering, and he was facing life in prison, with the risk of seeing his wife jailed and his 2 daughters left orphans. So he negotiated his immunity, and in exchange, a secret collaboration. He would deliver his former partners, one by one. And at the top of the list, you guessed it, Ricky Ross. To do that, Blandón hounded him with calls, pretending he owed money to the Colombians. He claimed he desperately needed him. Ricky hesitated for a long time, but cornered by the pressure, he eventually gave in. And in February 1995, everything was set up. Ricky showed up to the meeting arranged by Blandón, except it wasn't a regular deal. In reality, everything was under surveillance. Ricky Ross briefly inspected a vehicle containing several kilos of cocaine, and within seconds, the trap snapped shut. Police cars came out of nowhere. Ross tried to run, but it was useless. He was quickly captured, handcuffed to the ground, betrayed by the man he still considered a brother. And while Rick was going down, far away in Nicaragua, another empire was collapsing. Norwin Meneses, the godfather of the network, had recently come under close surveillance by the Nicaraguan National Police, and in November 1991, after months of secret investigation, authorities launched a series of simultaneous raids on his properties. Result, 725 kilos of cocaine were seized from his home. Norwin Meneses and several of his associates were arrested, bringing an end to one of the most powerful drug networks in Central America, a network the DEA had allowed to thrive for nearly 2 decades. At the time of his arrest, Meneses claimed he had acted with the blessing of a superpower, and that he had worked for the DEA with a secret mission to frame high-ranking Sandinista officials in a drug scandal. Except this time, no one was coming to save him.
And so that's how this story ends? Ricky Ross and Meneses behind bars, Blandón cleared, free as air. And the Contras? Nicaragua in flames, America handed over to crack. All that for a few scraps of territory.
You wanted the truth? Well, there you go, you've got it. It's true, we let traffickers flood our streets to finance a war that wasn't ours. We armed gangs while shouting about the war on drugs. We sacrificed entire neighborhoods to support a few thousand guerrillas on the other side of the world. We watched crack destroy generations, and we looked the other way. That's how it was, all of it in the name of national security. All because we thought the evil was them, and not us. I've told you everything I know. Now let me go!
We've got everything we need. Release him. Yes, boss.
No! In a time of universal deceit, telling the truth is a revolutionary act. George Orwell. It was a journalist named Gary Webb who exposed the whole affair to the public. A Pulitzer Prize winner, he published in 1996 a series of articles titled Dark Alliance in the San Jose Mercury News. He demonstrated how a network of traffickers linked to the Contras and directly backed by the CIA had flooded the United States with tons of cocaine. How this invisible alliance between narcos and federal agencies triggered the explosion of crack in black ghettos across America. A drug that had been virtually non-existent and in just a few years became a national epidemic. Dark Alliance was the first major journalistic investigation published simultaneously in print and online, a story that quickly went viral, shared by street activists, radio hosts, and political figures opposed to the Reagan and Bush administrations. The backlash was so intense, the CIA director himself had to take an unprecedented step, publicly defend the agency during a heated community meeting in Los Angeles.
Now, we all know that the U.S. government and the CIA supported the Contras in their efforts to overthrow the Sandinista government in Nicaragua in the middle 80s. Now, it is alleged the CIA also helped the Contras raise money for arms by introducing crack cocaine into California. It is an appalling charge. It is a charge that cannot go unanswered. I have asked the CIA Inspector General to undertake a full investigation.
Faced with the scandal, the American press then turned on Webb himself. Instead of investigating the facts, The New York Times, the Washington Post, and the Los Angeles Times mobilized to discredit the journalist. Isolated and demoted, Webb eventually resigned from the San Jose Mercury News. In 1998, the CIA's Inspector General finally admitted that the agency had indeed maintained ties with drug traffickers connected to the Contras, and that it had turned a blind eye to their activities, and sometimes even protected them. Ricky Ross, the crack king of South Central, would later claim he knew nothing about those connections. To him, Blandón was just a nice guy with a lot of cheap cocaine. After the trap set by the Nicaraguan in the DEA operation, Ross was sentenced to life in prison. He was eventually released in 2009 for good behavior. As for Blandón, he was never seriously prosecuted. He still served a 28-month prison sentence. Afterward, he obtained a U.S. permanent resident card and received payment from the DEA for his role as an informant. His own lawyer claimed that the CIA had approved his illegal activities. Norwin Meneses, a central figure in the network, was never arrested by U.S. authorities. It was only in Nicaragua, in 1991, that he was tried for drug trafficking. During his trial, a former military officer claimed that Meneses had openly financed the Contras by selling cocaine. Sentenced to 15 years in prison, he was released after 7. Multiple witnesses said Meneses enjoyed total protection. It should also be noted that in 1986, another scandal erupted. The Iran-Contra affair. The U.S. Congress discovered that the Reagan administration had sold weapons to Iran, despite an arms embargo, in order to fund the Contras in Nicaragua. Of the $30 million paid by Tehran, only $12 million was used to deliver the weapons that had been promised. The rest was diverted to arm the Contras. An operation carried out in direct violation of laws passed by Congress and approved at the highest levels of government. Several government officials were convicted, but none went to prison. Reagan, meanwhile, remained popular until the end of his term. Yet, despite the weapons and Iranian money, the Contras never managed to defeat the Sandinistas militarily. It was only after a bloody civil war, repeated sabotage, and constant pressure from the United States that the Sandinista regime finally gave way, not to bullets, but at the ballot box. A center-right coalition, led by Violeta Chamorro, won the elections in February 1990. But what few people knew at the time was that this war, supposedly fought in the name of freedom, was also financed with cocaine. And that truth was inconvenient. On December 10, 2004, Gary Webb was found dead in his home in California, with 2 gunshot wounds to the head. According to the official version, he took his own life.
Give us some explanations. You, the president, and everybody else should be highly upset and say, how did this cancer get here? How did it happen?
I will tell you, Director Deutsch, as a former Los Angeles police narcotics detective, that the agency has dealt drugs throughout this country for a long time.
CIA fights drugs. CIA does not encourage drugs.
How are we supposed to trust the CIA official to investigate themselves?
You want to know why black people don't believe in the government? Because we know what the government is capable of.
Don't give me the conspiracy bullshit. Come on, you're a more intelligent man than that. Well, come on. I mean, come on. There has never been a conspiracy.
And some of the money they were making was going to support an army that the men who ran the cocaine ring worked for, called the FDN. This was an army that the CIA started in 1981 and supported.
Better known to us, most of us who remember news, the Contras.
The report said 2 Nicaraguans, Danilo Blandón and Norwin Meneses, sold tons of cocaine to Los Angeles drug dealer Ricky Ross.
Did the CIA put drugs into the black community?
We don't have any evidence so far that they did it directly. And what we have evidence of is that men working for a CIA-run army did do that.
And that's the end of the video. If you made it this far, first of all, thank you. I hope you enjoyed the documentary. As always, if you liked it, a like, a comment, or a share are all small gestures that help keep this kind of content alive. Yeah, as you saw, I went a bit further with this one. I chose a more original narrative angle than usual, similar to the Alcatraz video, with real staging. Of course, nothing was invented. Every fact is real and rigorously sourced. I also want to credit 2 major inspirations for this video. The first is the Call of Duty Black Ops game, from which I borrowed the immersive interrogation style, and the series Snowfall, which brilliantly depicts the era and rise of crack in Los Angeles. If you've never checked out those works, I can only recommend them. Thanks again for your loyalty, your messages, and your energy. I hope to see you soon for a new story. Until then, take care of yourselves.